everyone, and welcome to another episode of Environmental with Dandelion. On this podcast, we deep dive into the intersection of business and sustainability. And we are your hosts and the founders of Dandelion Branding. I'm Court, and that's Ob.
Hello.
Today, we are talking to Sam Schutte, who is the co-founder and CEO of Synthica Energy. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so Synthica is really cool. You are developing anaerobic digestion facilities that are designed to convert food waste into renewable gas. Is that right?
Oh, yeah. Tell us about it.
Yeah, so Synthica is a renewable natural gas and anaerobic digestion platform that we're developing, and basically building a lot of these facilities in major markets around the U.S. through. So we have our kind of flagship facility is in the Cincinnati market right now. That's about halfway complete construction-wise, targeting going online in the spring next year. And then we have several projects in Texas going on, as well as in Georgia and sort of around the South and in Midwest right now that we're either in planning or engineering or various development stages on. But basically, like you said, we take all kind of pre-consumer food waste and sort of organic manufacturing byproducts and utilizing a kind of multi-stage biochemical process, convert those into renewable fuel, which is renewable natural gas, inject that into the utility pipelines, gas pipelines, and it's a one-for-one pipeline gas replacement.
Really? Wow. And is that possible to do at scale?
Yeah, I mean these are pretty large facilities. I mean the facility in Cincinnati, for instance. I mean it takes about 500 tons a day of organic materials. So you think about that's it's quite a lot of trucks coming through, like maybe 20, 30 trucks a day of material, and it produces sort of, if you run the math on that, it produces around the equivalent of like 7,000 gallons of diesel energy or gallons of gasoline energy per day. So that's what we consider scale. I mean, in the natural gas industry, there are of course much larger facilities out there running on fossil gas and so forth. But that's part of our goal, is to build these out, because just about every major in the market in the U.S. has a food waste problem, has an organics diversion problem, has a landfill problem. And this is something that we can work on, sort of rescuing that 50% of landfill capacity that's organics, rather than just burying it in the ground. So,
wow. So, is the pre-consumer waste that you are sort of your input material, would that traditionally end up in the landfill?
Yeah, a lot of it. I mean, it is actually there's several potential outlets that the stuff that we take might go to. I mean, there's incinerators where they might be burning stuff. There's landfill, of course, is where you're burying it. Some of it may be, put down into sort of traditional municipal treatment plants that, like sewage plants and stuff. Most of those plants actually use energy to treat their wastewater instead of getting energy out of it, though. So that's not very sustainable. And there's other outlets. I mean, there's composting, there's land application, animal feed. A lot of that, there's upsides and downsides to every solution. But for a lot of the material we take, anaerobic digestion is really the best solution. And I think companies out there today, part of our whole thing, like our tagline, is convenient sustainability, right? And the reason we say that is a lot of those outlets today are many hours away by truck from the manufacturers and from the producers of these materials. And so that's not great either, to be burning 6 hours of diesel one way just so you can find animals to feed your material to, right? So
And so the idea here is that major, like Cincinnati is a major metropolitan city, right? And as you say, they kind of all generally have a food waste issue throughout the state. So the idea would be like a metropolitan area also has one of the Synthica facilities and is operating through its own natural gas, like what, I guess, what is the application for the natural gas? And um,
Yes, I mean, so you got it right. I mean, we kind of, our facilities are, we call it urban food waste digestion, or kind of an urban approach. It's basically like, as opposed to like in our space, a lot of the technology developed on farms, right? So pig farms, dairy farms. That's where it kind of like maybe a lot of its inception was. But you can't have like 100 million gallon outdoor lagoons in the middle of the city somewhere for storing this stuff, right? So we have to use a lot more technology in terms of managing those materials better in order to make that a real actual urban friendly solution, because then that way you're near the manufacturers who are typically in those markets because they need employees, they need staff, they need workers, right? um, and that just makes us that more convenient of an option for them. In terms of like what happens with the gas, so renewable natural gas, like I said, we clean that up basically because you got to remove like carbon dioxide from it, you got to remove some moisture from it as it comes out of the digesters, and inject that into the utility pipelines. At that point, we can basically sell that gas. Since we're a producer of that gas, we can sell that to buyers who want to run their factories on a low carbon fuel. Renewable natural gas is typically either negative carbon or zero carbon. Um, when you look at like the total carbon life cycle of it, it's actually less, a lot less carbon than like fossil gas, right? So, say if you're a manufacturer making steel or something like that, or maybe it's a bad example. A lot of those guys use like electric arc furnaces, right? But let's say you're a bakery, you're a brewery, something like that, where you're using a lot of natural gas. You can buy our gas instead, and then that could make your whole facility a zero carbon brewery, right? So industrial heat and processes, that's a big sort of outlet. The other big outlets is like vehicle fuel, compressed natural gas vehicles. I mean, that's like a really big deal in California, for instance, and other markets. Um, there's a whole lot of uses for it, but pretty much anybody that uses natural gas, significant volumes of natural gas, is probably looking at how much RNG.
wow, of course. I was just thinking about the implication of, you said 7,000 tons a, a day, or
Talking about the energy yield,
yeah, sorry.
I mean, it's around about like 7,000 gallons of gas equivalent, like at our.
Gallons. Okay. 7,000 gallons. And I'm just thinking about the like implication of what that means if it doesn't need to be mined also, like, and what it could mean. Yeah. I'm thinking about the wastewater that goes into mining. There's a lot more that isn't sustainable about mining that this kind of completely does away with. And as you say, it's something that we already have. Or regardless of anything else, like we're still growing that food and growing these crops, and then we're still wasting them. So it's literally just using what we're otherwise just, wow. Sorry, I know I'm catching up here, but
No, I kind of like, what I tell people is like, it's really just a mindset thing, right? Because if you were, let's say you're a factory and you had a couple hundred gallons of gasoline a day that you're that you were producing, would you just landfill that? Like, and that energy containing liquid, right? Gasoline. No, you would say there's energy in here. We should use this, But we don't look at organics as having an energy value. We look at them as just waste and just trash, right? Um, and so if you think about, like, for instance, one of the materials we can take a lot of, I didn't mention yet, is packaged food products, right? So, like, packaged products are a real challenge in the industry because they're packaged. Like, how do you imagine if you have, say, donuts or something that are individually wrapped in some kind of a container inside a box on a pallet, wrapped in shrink wrap? What can you do with it other than landfill it, right? And the problem is that if the storage warehouses for such products, um, a couple things happen. Like, they might have an equipment failure of, like, refrigeration, and therefore they have to pitch, like, so let's say it's ice cream, or let's say it's even just whatever. They have to pitch that, or it expires and then they pitch that, right? Or a forklift might back into and damage that pallet. And when, like, let's say they just puncture one box in the pallet, they usually throw the entire pallet away because they can't unwrap it all, go down to the very bottom, remove the one damaged box. So if you go to facilities such as ours, you'll see these big pallets of, like, French fries, for instance, or hamburgers or donuts, or you see a lot of, like, the little boxes of milk from, like, schools. There appears to be nothing wrong with them, and there really isn't. It's just one of them got damaged. They got too warm, and the funny thing is we often get challenged on that, like, well, why aren't we giving that to food banks, and why aren't we giving that to feed the hungry? We are. Yeah, they can't take them if they're exposed to heat. Obviously, like, if they're damaged and leaking, they can't take them. But also, like, the kind of weird reality is that there are not enough people to take them that need, like, you look at some of the volumes coming out of these plants that are, like, I was talking to one the other day. They send out and throw away 12,000 gallons of milk a day, right? That basically something goes wrong with, they get rid of. Okay. Think about that, like, into little boxes. How many people would have to want that free milk? There's just not enough people, so it has to go somewhere, right? Um, so, yeah, we're just throwing away that energy containing material in almost all of these markets. There's no real good solutions for, that we're active in. And it's a little bit of a mindset shift.
I think so. And I think it's our favorite time in the show, and I'm really excited to hear your answer to our favorite question. But before we do that, for those of you watching at home, please don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button so that you get a notification for every inspiring sustainability talk that we have. We are here for you twice a month, the first and third Wednesdays of every month. And now, Sam, can you please tell us about the role that you and Synthica are playing in the transition to a more sustainable future?
Well, I think it's really a carbon reduction story overall. If you look at the life cycle of, we're attacking that on two angles. If you look at the life cycle of natural gas that's typically produced, and where it comes from, like you said, drilling in the ground, the transportation, the pumping, all this sort of stuff, the purification, the compression, all that stuff. And then if you look at the life cycle of food products, right? Doing what we're doing, and producing a low carbon fuel, and also reducing all the carbon that's created from, as I said, like, driving long distances to have materials disposed of. What I always tell folks is, like, people who work here, for instance, is, for every plant that we build, we wipe out, I think if you did the math, we wipe out the carbon impact of, like, you and all your family members and all your friends for like your life, right? Because there's that much of a significant dent in carbon. So that, so I think a little bit of it is like, I mean, in the grand scheme of things, look, it's a small dent. We're not removing gigatons a year, and clearly a lot. Yeah, and clearly like we're very supportive of uh, these carbon removal systems that are going in. Like I read, and there's two in Louisiana being built. That's awesome. Needs to happen. Electrification, awesome. Needs to happen. It all needs to happen, right? Um, but the reality is like there's a lot of processes and facilities that at least in the next 20-25 years are going to use natural gas, right? And so if we as an industry and the facilities we build can, you know, slow down how fast we're filling landfills up and um, cover a couple percentage points, which is a massive number of natural gas usage, and maybe do more and more and more as time goes on. Um, you know, it every bit helps, right? Especially in those hard. We talk a lot in our space about like hard to convert industries that like are not going to electrify easily, right? So I think it's really a carbon mission is what it comes down to, as well as a landfill diversion mission.
And so are you working with like local governments or like local municipalities in order to kind of create these new plants or like I guess how do you become established in a new area so that, the food suppliers know that you're an option and the I don't know, I guess utility companies also know that you provide energy.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think a lot of that is sort of good old fashioned, you know, hitting the street and meeting and talking to people and leveraging relationships. It's pretty an old fashioned approach. Both the waste and energy industries are pretty old school. Like it's a relationship industry. It's who you know. I think like for us, part of it is we've established we're sort of known in the space, right? So it's really exciting that we're in a niche that is still pretty new. This organics and food waste that we get calls from the major oil companies wanting to talk to us, like just cold, like, hey, can we talk to you? We're so and so. Part of it is, look, we are one of the. There's a very small list of companies that have successfully sort of developed a facility doing this. There's a handful. We have some competitors, but our Cincinnati plant, like that's going to come online soon. It's underway, and just getting to that point where it's off the ground and being built took like a lot of work. It was like the hardest thing my business partner and I have ever done. And what we then did is as we developed out the pipeline, we had attracted the interest of like serious infrastructure money. And so like last summer we closed a deal with Goldman Sachs Asset Management, and so they're now in our business and funding the platform. And so now when we go to those markets and local government and utilities, obviously we have a lot more legitimacy because we're backed by Goldman, um, and working with the folks there. So that helps for sure too. Um, and it's really, I don't know, it's really interesting and impressive sort of how much a lot of big names need our help doing this. It's certainly flattering and exciting, when you talk to these big companies. But it's a really hard thing to develop, and it takes a lot of sort of diverse skill set to get done. So we were lucky to pull it off in Cincinnati, and then here we're going to do it, more and more. So.
I think that, as you say, the industry is about who you know in both the food waste and in the oil and gas world. So as you do it more, you will be able to do it more. The doors will open for you. As you say, you're getting phone calls and stuff. That's really exciting. And it's hard to that, I mean, that's the marketing side of it, right? It's just like you got to be boots on the ground, you got to talk to people, you got to take every phone call and be there. But the technology that you're built, as you say, you have like a couple of competitors, but the anaerobic technology itself is super unique. That was the first time that we had certainly ever heard about it, especially like actually happening and being put into a plant. And so I don't know if you have a lot of competitors in that realm. Do you Can you tell us a little bit about that process?
Kind of interesting because I guess how I would put it is like uh, the technology of well, look the technology, the actual like you know stuff that makes anaerobic digestion work. Well, look, I mean, technically it's been around for millennia because basically a digester is a giant cow stomach, right? That's what it's a 2, 3, 4 million gallon cow stomach. The bacteria that live in it are from a cow stomach, like the same bacteria, right? Um, it's been applied on a widespread basis in the U.S. since maybe the 60s and 70s with municipal treatment plants who are digesting, the wastewater they take in city sewer systems and stuff, right? But it was sort of just none of the like most of those plants don't actually produce or do anything with the natural gas. They just flare it, they get rid of it, like still today, right? So it was it just wasn't a thing. It just wasn't a thing. I mean, the reason they deployed anaerobic digestion was to reduce nutrient load of their materials, and the natural gas was just an afterthought because it wasn't worth like spending the money to clean it up and actually because it's expensive to clean it up and what we call upgrade and basically purify it to get it to the point where it's pipeline quality, right? So there's a lot of companies right now looking at those older systems and upgrading them and stuff. What happened then is, of course, in Europe and in countries like where you're at, Bob, they said, "Hey, we're resource constrained. We don't have enough energy because we don't have the natural gas deposits that like the U.S. has or like other countries have, and we have all this material that's really expensive, and we have all this regulation. Let's use this sort of older technology to handle, dairy and food waste and stuff." So it's Europe is significantly further ahead in this market than the U.S. is, like way ahead to the point that it's like almost saturated over there in a lot of countries, like the UK. There's a whole lot of plants like ours, and then in the U.S. here now we're realizing that was a good idea, and the sort of political powers that be created the right incentives for it to be similar to like what's in Europe for it to work. So you put all that together and you have a bit of a gold rush going on, frankly, where it's like who can build the most plants first. Um, you look at in Germany. In Germany, for instance, they have like I can't remember the number, but significantly fewer cattle than the US, obviously, like way less cattle, but they have thousands of these plants. Like every dairy farm in Germany probably is connected to a digester. Whereas in the States, it's like, single digits probably still, I bet. So big difference. Yeah. Yep. And there's been, I mean, if you go to if you go to our industry conferences, there's just a lot of excitement because obviously there's billions and billions of dollars being poured into the industry to take advantage of all the sort of opportunity there, and and that's why it's hopeful. Like I think in the next 20 years, we probably will see that anything that can be digested that has energy content is being digested, and you will see a lot more. You'll start to see things like on your utility bill, like, hey, would you like to have your natural gas bill be completely renewable? You can check the box and your price will go up if you check that box, right? Because it is more expensive. But that's not something that most people can do today, right? For their home usage. But it is out there in certain states. So
Do you think that the availability of this option will also kind of coincide with more folks having access to like compost? Like, is it similar at all to having like I guess municipal composting?
It's there's overlap, but only to a certain degree. So like composting is not an anaerobic process. It's an aerobic process. If your compost is not getting enough oxygen, that's a bad thing. It kind of gets, it doesn't become compost, right? Exactly. Composting, we take a lot of wet materials. Composting typically does not want to do that because, for obvious reasons, where does it go, right? They also take a lot of like yard waste, wood clippings, grass, mulch, whatever stuff that we don't take because that won't break down sufficiently in a digester like ours, right? I mean, think about it. How long does it take for wood to break down versus like food, right? It takes much longer. Um, so there are certain like feedstocks that overlap with composting. There are certain feedstocks that are just a way better choice to do composting with. But the reality, the problem is, and that's a whole, I can have a whole discussion about composting. But the problem is like it's still an expensive thing to deploy, and they don't get any energy content out of it. So they have to cover the sort of operational costs and construction costs only by the disposal fees they charge because they don't have any energy product. Now they can sell compost, but so do we. So like, it's a little bit harder business to work out sometimes. Um,
That's why you're on the pre-consumer side.
that's right. That's right. Yeah, and it can also be hard for them, of course, just to find the right location for that kind of outdoor composting. So
That makes sense. It makes sense to me that you also sell compost, as you say.
yeah, because I mean, we even though we take stuff that is more liquid, there still are solids in it. So we end up with solids, which we can either sell, find better uses for, do a lot of different things with. Um, but I guess the point is that to some degree, what we're doing is easier to work out in a business model than a lot of the composting operations, we think. So
That makes sense. And is there waste to what you're building aside from like if you say we can't really use this in the process, like does your process have a lot of waste?
well, look, I mean, every gallon of water you take in, we don't destroy water, right? Like the water comes back out. Um, I mean, basically, what we do is we take complex organic molecules and break them down into simple organics molecules and release energy in that process. So we still end up with those simple organic molecules to do something with. And, that's nitrogen, phosphorus, whatever ends up in our wastewater. Um, so we typically there's a variety of kind of strategies to what we do with that in terms of treating it before we can dispose of it ourselves. There's options to sort of use that as fertilizer. It's tricky because there's so much of it. I mean, you think about 500-ish tons a day of it. In a lot of, depending on that can be hard to get rid of. But ultimately, it's mostly water. It's probably 99% water by the time we're done with it, which has to go somewhere. So
Yeah. Well, you could do a lot worse than having water to treat. And because you're breaking down organics, it's not. I imagine it's not as dirty as the other option where we get our.
yeah, it's basically not, well, yes, and it's also like it's basically not as high strength as what we call it of a wastewater by the time we're done with it. So it's easier for like a municipal treatment plant that we might be connected to deal with it, or it's easier for like if we wanted to land apply it or use it for some other purpose, it's easier to deal with it because the high strength waste, like imagine like you know a liquid coming out of like a place that makes chicken nuggets or something, like it's got a lot of yeah, we see a lot of interesting stuff. But it's got a lot of fat in it. It's got a lot of protein in it. Like that's hard to deal with to get rid of. And then by the time we break it down, if it's those more simple organic molecules, then it's a little easier to deal with to some degree. So yeah, but it is really interesting when you get into the industry, like how much of a challenge just getting rid of water is for companies. Like it's all about the water half the time, and because it's getting it really clean to the point that it's cheap to get rid of it is massively expensive. Um, so everybody's kind of always trying to find some way to sustainably and cheaply get rid of water. Like that's like half the story. I feel like sometimes kind of funny.
Yeah. Well, there's tech out there. There needs to be, you know. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this with us. I feel like I could ask you questions about this process all day long.
Yeah, it's I could talk about it all day long. There's just a lot to cover. I mean,
Yeah, there's a lot to cover. And if somebody wanted to be that person that covers it with you or does another interview with you or wants to just connect and ask you 1,000 questions, where can they find you?
yeah, so I mean our website is just at synthica.com. That's synthica.com. We have a very active social media page, Facebook, Instagram, that you can find just by searching for Synthica as well. Um, we go to a lot of trade shows in the food and energy space for people in the industry. I'm sure people probably will run into us there. We're actually looking in the short term here at launching our own podcast as well. So hopefully we'll get that moving in the next few months, so people can learn more about the industry and what we're doing there. But yeah, um, on our website you can reach out to any of us there. We've got our contact details, so I'd be happy to talk to folks, and particularly in the markets in Texas, which San Antonio, Houston, as well as Atlanta, where we're really active right now, working on 3 facilities. Interested in talking to folks in those markets about how we can help solve problems.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone, for watching. Sam, thank you so much again for your time. And it's very, very exciting that this is such a budding industry. I can't wait to hear more. Yeah. Bye, everybody.